Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my top 10 favorite books of 2015. I love it when this time of year rolls around and everyone starts uploading their favorite books of the year videos because I get so many great recommendations from these videos, and I'm so excited to finally be filming my own. I read so many wonderful books this year, but I narrowed it down to a total of 10 books that I read this year, and all of these books didn't come out in 2015. I actually don't think any of them came out in 2015, but I read all of them for the first time in 2015. Therefore, they are my favorites that I read in 2015. So just to give you guys a total of books that I read this year, I read a total of 62 books this year, and my Goodreads reading goal was 50, so I surpassed that by 12 books. I haven't read this many books in a year in a very long time, and I'm really happy about it, and I had a really good reading year. But without any further ado, because this is already going to be an extremely long video, let's get into my top 10 favorite books I read in 2015. So coming in at number 10, honestly, this book could be at number 1 because technically this is a reread, but it's different, and this reading experience was just too good for me not to include this book on my list. And that book is the illustrated edition of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I read this book this month as part of my Harry Potter reread, and I read this one instead of the regular first book in the series, and I absolutely loved it. And I know I've already read the book, but I'm gonna include it in here anyway because it was such a different experience than the actual just regular book. The illustrations made it so much more magical, if that was even possible, but I absolutely adored this and it was just fantastic, so I had to include it in my list. So coming in at number 9, I was actually kind of hesitant to put this book on my list, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that this was one of my favorite books that I read this year, because it honestly was. And that book is Crown of Midnight, the second book in the Throne of Glass series. I read the whole Throne of Glass series this year, and while I liked the first 2 books, even the first 3 when I first read them, when I read Queen of Shadows, I kind of started disliking the rest of the series, which tends to happen with me with a lot of series. But nonetheless, I started to dislike the rest of the series, except for this book. Honestly, this book just had so much angst at just like the right time when I really needed it. So if I were to go back and reread it, I'd probably read it through a more critical eye. But honestly, I really enjoyed this one. I thought that the storyline in this one was far better than the other books in the series, and the characterization was a lot better, and I just overall really enjoyed this book, so I can't not include it in this list because I really did love it, even though I have my issues with the rest of the series. So coming in at number 8, I'm really excited to have this book included on this list because it took me too long to read this book, to even start reading this book, and that is City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. I've mentioned many times before that I have been reading the Shadowhunters series since I was in middle school, so it's been years and years, but I never picked this book up, even though I had it sitting on my shelf right after it came out. I'm pretty sure I pre-ordered this book, but I never picked it up until this year when I finally read it and I finally finished it, and I was really happy with the ending. It was really satisfying. Everything was wrapped up in a way that I was really pleased with. It's definitely one of my favorite books that I read this year, and just a wonderful conclusion to a very well-loved series. Coming in at number 7 is another series, but this time it's the entirety of the series, which is 13 books. So I'm just including them as one, but that is the Series of Unfortunate Events books by Lemony Snicket. I read these books over a span of a few months. I read a couple of them each month, and it took me a few months to finish them all, but I absolutely loved them, and this has become one of my all-time favorite series. The series is just so dark, but I absolutely love that about it, and it's just wonderful. The writing is wonderful. I love the mystery. I hate how many unanswered questions there are, but at the same time I love that. It's just a wonderful series, and it took me forever to pick these books up because most everyone I know read them when they were really young, but I read them for the first time this year, but I'm very happy that I did because I very much enjoyed these books. So coming in at number 6 is one of the books that I read at the very beginning of this year. I think it was actually the first book I read at the beginning of the year. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the first book I read this year, and I had to read it for school, and that is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. So like I said, we had to read this book for my English class in my senior year of high school, and I absolutely adored it. I thought that it was fantastic. I fell in love with Hemingway, I fell in love with the story, and now I just want to pick up more Hemingway and read everything he's ever written. I know Hemingway isn't really for everybody, but personally I love his writing style, and I feel like this was probably the best book to start with. So basically this story just kind of follows around this group of friends who live in France, and they end up going to Spain on a vacation, and they're just kind of hanging out and watching bullfights. There isn't really like a solid, definite plot. It's just kind of more following this group of friends around, and it's far more symbolic than it is literal. Personally, I really enjoyed that about it. Like I said, I don't think it would be everybody's cup of tea, but I really loved it. And if you're looking for a classic that I'd say is very easy to read, but has lots of symbolism, if you like that type of stuff, then definitely check out Hemingway's writing, because there's so much subtext in here, but I love that stuff. So, coming in at number 5 on my list is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This book takes place in a kind of futuristic, almost dystopian sort of world where a disease has spread through the entire world and basically wiped out most of the population. And it follows around this theater troupe who goes around to different settlements that are kind of still established, and they perform music and they perform Shakespeare plays. And it just follows them around and kind of tells their story and individual characters' stories within that. And then it also does some time jumps. So it'll go back in time to before the disease wiped everybody out and tell the story of some other individual characters who are also intertwined with the plot. So the plot does jump around quite a bit, but personally I think that that is one of the best aspects of this book. It's really unique. It's unlike any other story that I've ever read, and the writing is just beautiful. The characters are really well developed and really wonderful. Each character's individual story is also unique and wonderful in its own way. And once you finish this book, you just want to know like what else happened with the characters. Like, where did they end up? What happened to this person? What happened to that person? How are they now? What are they feeling? I just got so invested in each of their lives individually, and I wanted to know more, and I just absolutely adored this book. The next book on my list is not actually technically a book, but more of a comic or a comic series, and if you couldn't guess by now, it is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. If you guys have been watching my channel for a little while now, then you've probably heard me talk about this comic series in almost every video, like every other video, because I love this comic series so much. I am so invested in it. This comic series is very sci-fi, but even if you don't like sci-fi, I think that you could very much enjoy this series, because I'm not usually the biggest fan of sci-fi, but I really love this. It's just essentially about these two characters who both come from different planets, and these two planets are at war with each other, and they are not supposed to be together, but against all odds, they are, and it just kind of follows their storyline, but then it follows a lot of other characters' storylines as well, and each of them, kind of like Station 11, each of them are just so wonderful and unique, and I get so invested in each one, and I love, honestly, like every character in this book, which rarely ever happens, but I really do. I love all of the characters. I would definitely put this up there with some of my favorite series of all time, like The Infernal Devices and Harry Potter, because I love it that much. It's just so good. Everything about it is just so good. So the next book on my list automatically became an all-time favorite after I finished reading it, and that is The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender. This is a magical realism story that follows around a character named Ava Lavender who tells the story of 3 different generations of her family. First, she tells her great-grandmother's story, then she tells her grandmother's story, and then she tells her mother's, and then she also tells her own. So it's just a story about love, and it's a story about how love has impacted each of these individual women's lives. But it is also so much more than that, and there's a scene in this book that is honestly one of my all-time favorite scenes in any book that I've ever read, and I think about that scene from time to time and I just get really emotional. And this is just one of those books that's like that. It sticks with you, and sometimes I'll just be sitting down and I'll think of parts of this book, and then I'm just flooded with all of these feelings, and it's always in the back of my mind, and I just absolutely adored it. And I honestly wanted to reread it right after I finished it, and that for me is a sign that I really, really loved a book. So the second to last book on my list of favorites for the year goes to Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sands. This book tells the story of Aristotle, a boy who lives in El Paso, Texas in the 80s, and he's kind of just a loner, but then he ends up meeting a friend one summer named Dante, and the two automatically click and they become best friends, and it just kind of follows their story around. And it's about Ari discovering himself, it's about him discovering more about his family, about his friendship for Dante and his feelings, and it's just so beautiful. I honestly wasn't really expecting anything with this book, and when I finished it, I was in tears because the last scene of this book is just so beautiful, and it gets me every single time. Honestly, just talking about it, I get really, really emotional. And this is an LGBTQ plus book in the best way possible. The characters are not stereotypes. This book isn't riddled with tropes. And I just feel like this book is so much more than it is on the surface. It has so many beautiful messages throughout it. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And again, I just wanted to go back and reread this once I finished reading it because I loved it that much. And I definitely know I will be rereading this book in the future. And finally, we are at the very last book, my favorite book that I read in 2015. And for those of you who've been watching my channel, you probably already know what book this is. It should not be a surprise at all to anybody. But hands down, my favorite book of 2015 has to go to The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I have never loved a book like I have loved this book. The characters, the plot, the atmosphere, the writing, everything about it was just hands down perfection to me. And I think what really stands out about this book to me is the characters, which, if you couldn't tell throughout the rest of this video, characters are very, very important to me, usually more so than plot. And I think that's what really gets me with this book. I just love all of the characters. Each of the characters is just so three-dimensional. None of them are 100% good, none of them are 100% bad. They're all kind of morally gray. And I just loved that because it is so reflective of real life, but this book is more along the lines of fantasy and magical realism. So when those two things are just kind of intertwined, I eat it up. I loved it. And I honestly cannot stop talking about it. I think you guys will be hearing me talk about this book over and over and over again. I don't think I can ever stop. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm also not really sorry because I adore this book with every fiber of my being. It is my favorite thing, my favorite book. And if you haven't read it yet, please go change that. So that is it, guys. That is it for my list of favorite books that I read in 2015. Hopefully this video inspired you at least a little bit to check some of these books out because honestly, all of them are just so fabulous and I highly, highly recommend every single one of them. So if you're interested in any of them, please go check them out because they're just all so wonderful. So let me know in the comments down below, what are some of your favorite books that you read in 2015? Because I will definitely read through all of them and pick out the ones that interest me and put them on my TBR for next year. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in my next video. Bye! Every year when this time of year rolls around and my birthday rolls around, I just make a giant list of books that I want and then give them out to my friends and family whenever